with BLM, and we did have Dennis Benson, but he has just left BLM. I'm not sure who his replacement is, but the boss there, if we could arrange a meeting of maybe those folks. We have Joel Rauch, who's been our trail coordinator. He left, but he's back, and so I think we had a contract set up where he was actually funded. That position was funded by the agencies. We were even looking at approaching the Forest Service to join in as a partner to help fund that. So there's that coordination between the different entities. We realized with the budget sequestration and those things, that's kind of eliminated the funding for the time being. But moving ahead, if we could get your staff, maybe we could try to arrange in the next few weeks a meeting of all those partners, the private sector community. We've got Dan Brown at the bike shop, the folks from the L Works and others through the chamber, through this LADC group, and Jared, of course, from the city. If we could pull together and have a meeting to talk about how we can maybe work on the non-motorized recreation and get you guys more involved, that would be an outstanding step forward.
And it should be...
And I'd like you to be there if you do it, because I think you need to see it.
It probably wouldn't be very controversial. It would be something that the environmental documentation should not be all that controversial with the environmental community or those in the commodity industry. Because it would have a limited amount of impact on the land. We would have to, naturally, being the government, we'd have to build the trails to standard.
Sure.
They would have to...
Well, we use the INVA standard, which is really the internationally recognized standard that I think all agencies have kind of migrated to. We had a trail crew here recently that kind of worked with the locals to teach what that really means. And but I think that now is the time to strike, and it would be critical as it relates to our county economic development strategy, the SIDS thing, to get that phase up and moving. And I think your leadership right now in the next few months would be really critical to cement that relationship. And the big missing piece with that has been the Forest Service. And everybody keeps saying, where's the Forest Service and why isn't the Forest Service here? Even though I do point out, well, Chris O'Brien's here and this one's there, and we do have some on the fringes, but we need to get at the center of it. So.
Well, and I will work with Chris to make sure that when the next meetings are, that I will be at those meetings.
Okay.
I
will, Mr. Chairman, work with Jerry and his staff, and maybe we can bring together here by late July or early August a meeting of all these interests, and maybe we can get this thing moving. But I appreciate your support of that, because I know you've expressed that to me in private conversation, and this is our first chance to publicly talk about it.
And the other thing, just an update of what's happening as far as our effort to salvage some of the material on both the Reading fire up on the Hat Creek District and the Chips fire, which burnt off the Plumas onto the Lassen. Both those environmental documents are essentially completed. We're working with the Washington office. The only person that can grant what's called an emergency situation determination, which allows us to implement during at the projects during the appeal period, is the Chief of the Forest Service. And so we've been working with the Washington office, getting the information that they need. We anticipate hearing on both of those this week, that the Chief does support it, and we will be, as soon as I sign those decisions, we've been working all through the winter, basically since the fires were out, to lay out and evaluate the volume of the timber that we will be selling in there, that we will also, at the same time we announce the decision, we will be announcing the sales. Because that's what the emergency situation determination allows us to do, is move forward, get the sales out there, prospective bidders can then bid on them, and we can move quickly to get them under contract, so that we, if we go much over 12 months after the fire has killed the timber, we start losing significant value and volume of that fire-killed timber. And if it goes as long as 24 months, it's almost impossible to sell it. There's really no longer any commercial value to that.
Basically, you have to the end of this year. I mean,
Yeah, you gotta do it this
season. It's not done by winter,
Yeah.
next year.
Pretty much so, yeah, absolutely. And
Well, I don't want to say it would be unprecedented in my
unfortunately,
experience, but
but
this is I hope not.
Supervisor Chapman pointed out our failure just out of town here a few years ago, and, you know,
Yeah,
hopefully
but that's
we're
sort
going to be
of,
more
as you well know, that's Forest Service-wide,
Yeah.
the salvage issue and the
It
appeals
is.
and so on and so forth.
And that failure preceded your tenure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it was an agency failure.
It was, and you know, and the difference is the legacy you leave, you know, can be profound compared to the legacy of maybe some of your predecessors, and I appreciate the fact that you're committed to that. I just have to say as a side, I just heard on the news this morning, I think it was on the radio, that Lawrence Crabtree, who
Yeah.
has his roots here in Lassen and Modoc County, recently
Yeah,
had been, went over to Plymouth
El
County
Dorado,
as the
yeah.
assistant. Now he's going to be tapped to be the fourth supervisor at the El Dorado.
Correct.
So, great guy.
Yeah.
No controversy down there.
No.
Does any board members, Aaron, you got a question? You bet.
Yeah, one thing real quick, I know I visited with you about this before, Jerry, and hearing Jim talk about the salvage things is, you know, we always tend to focus on the environmental side of things, but, you know, getting back to what Jim was saying, as far as the salvage laws, we need to put a lot more emphasis on the impact that these decisions are gonna have on the local economy and economic.
Correct.
And that's, I think this environmental stuff, we've been getting too focused on that, and thus we have no more sawmills in Lassen County, we have nothing in Modoc County, and we're just, we heard it before with the gal up here, you know, we have all this land mass, but no jobs, because everything keeps taken away from us, so.
It's usually good lady.
Right, and so keep focusing on the environmental side of things, or the economic side of things, to put that in there, to help make your decisions much more concrete.
You actually have a very strong voice in Bill Wickman, has from RCRC and other groups that he is with, that is, you know, writes very well to ensure that we're looking at that social side of things, looking at the economic impact of our decisions on our communities. And prior to your being on the board, I told the board that, you know, it's our goal to not be a neighbor, it's our goal to be a good neighbor, and a good neighbor does look out for, you know, what we can do to ensure that there is an economic underpinning that's coming from that 1.2 million acres I'm responsible for.
Thank you. Jim?
Just as a final on dealing with the timber stuff, now that the Quincy Library Group funding and that program is basically being phased out, it's not being reauthorized, and we're kind of in a wind-up phase here. What do you see for the future as a successor to that, in terms of how the Forest Service will be able to take some of the principles that have been at the core base of QLG for the future? I mean, it'll be after you leave, but what do you see as being our prospect?
We learned a lot of good things by implementing, being a pilot project for the Quincy Library Group Act, and that is that the concepts that they had as far as the defensive fuel profile zones, the group selection areas, these things really work. We know that we can basically catch a ongoing wildfire when it gets into a defensive fuel profile zone, because it will bring it back down to the ground. It will bring it to a point that firefighters can safely work on it. So we anticipate, we may not call them DFPZs any longer. That may not be the wording you'll see, but you'll see where we're trying to create defensible space, that we're trying to create heterogeneity in the forest, so it's not just the monoculture, that we're trying to create different age classes. All these things are contained in the Quincy Library Group, and at least on the Lassen, Plumas, and probably throughout all of Northern California, because these things were proved to be effective, and they also did the environmental work, the ecological restoration work, we'll continue that going. The regional forester talks about increasing the pace and scale of ecological restoration in California, and that is going to be done by doing what is needed on the ground. And our primary tool, at least on the Lassen, has been utilizing the timber industry to utilize the saw logs and the biomass that's produced, because we simply do not get funded enough to do this stuff with appropriated dollars. And we're not going to waste the products by just basically cutting it down and letting it rot. As long as we have a viable mill, you're absolutely right, there's no longer mills in Modoc and Lassen County, but we can get stuff up into Shasta County to Bernie. We can still move stuff over into Plumas County to Chester and Quincy. So we have the infrastructure in place, And it's very important to us in the Forest Service, if we are really going to meet our mission of being the stewards of the land, to ensure that we are providing an opportunity for that industry to stay vital.
Thank you very much. Arlene, did you have a question or comment?
No.
Mr. Burke?
I've been watching the timber cutting the last couple of years, and somebody told me to Google my own address and go, to map, and then start moving around so you can see it from the aerial view or the satellite view of your area. I was never so shocked. You can go into 2 or 3 counties and see nothing but patchwork holes in our hills. I keep hearing we don't have any mills here anymore. Is there any, in your opinion, is there any place left to cut timber commercially? Because if you look at what's left, it's to me, and I'm an environmentalist, to me it's disgusting that we live in such a beautiful place, and you look from your house, you move over and look, it's just big holes in our, they're very close together. Some of it's on private land, some of it's on government land, but it's just shocking to see how much timber has been taken in Lassen County alone. All the way up to Alturas. It's just, it's shocking to see how much has been allowed. Maybe there's nothing left in the harvest plan, the timber harvest plan, maybe there's nothing left to permit you to harvest here anymore. Let them take it all.
No.
Have you ever done that? Googled,
Yes. Yeah.
It's awful.
The vast majority of the even age management that you're seeing is Sierra Pacific lands.
I realize that.
And so a lot of, and they restock their stuff. After they cut it, they plant it back, and so.
They leave a little seed tree in the middle of these
Well,
lots.
and then they do plant seedlings. And so, they're, from a business standpoint, if they didn't plant it, they basically would be liquidating their assets and looking at getting out of business. That's the only reason a timber company just cuts everything and doesn't replant it, is because they plan on getting out of the business. I've experienced it in other places in my career, and when Champion decided to get out of northwest Montana, they just cut all the big timber and left. So if Sierra Pacific's here to stay, they're here as a neighbor, and so they replant. You go out to almost any of their stuff, like the stuff that they just harvested as you're going out on 36, going down the hill. You go back in about 2 years and you'll see a bunch of seedlings, probably about 400 per acre, that they replanted to get that back into production. Because it's on National Forest, we do very little even age management on these salvages, because basically all the stuff was killed. We will plant it back again. We'll go in and create a even age stand of timber. We are cutting someplace in the neighborhood of 5 to 10% of our annual growth on the Lassen. We're falling behind what's actually being produced out there. We could probably cut about 300 million, which is about 700,000 cubic feet of timber on an annual basis, and our forest would produce that much, and that would just keep us even. So we're selling and cutting at about 35 to 50 million board feet, or 70 to about 100,000 cubic feet a year.
Where is
So
it going?
it's going to, the saw logs are going either to Bernie, there's mills in Bernie, like I said, there's Collins Pine in Chester, there's the mill in, the SPI mill in Quincy. Some of the stuff is going over to Anderson. The biomass some of it's going out here to Honey Lake Power. That's the one segment of industry that is really in trouble, is the standalone biomass power generation plants. They're just barely hanging by a thread. And
Lassen Power went under.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you know, we're not overcutting your national forest. I mean, I would be the first one up here telling the county board that if they say, turn the Lassen into a tree farm, I'd say I don't work for SPI. I work for the American people.
Are you saying that all you see is all private lands when you, it's all private
No,
lands?
I can't say it's 100%. Like I said, when you look at when we're done with the fire salvages, it's going to be, there's going to be clear cuts out there because there's,
I think.
and I need to,
Mr. Chairman, if I could jump in there, I think, a clear illustration of what I think Gary's saying, and I think it's right on, is that when you take 36 over and you get, as you're approaching Gallows Corral and where the BLM contractor years ago was doing work on the old trestle and he wound up sparking a fire and it kind of burned up that hillside. And about half the hillside was owned by SPI and the other half was Forest Service managed property. And it was interesting, and that was the you might say the famous story, is it's very clear when you see the difference between public-private management, because where that boundary line was between them, everything to the left was harvested within a short order, and SPI got out there and planted it, and everything to the right that was public was basically, it was so small, I guess, an area to be able to bring in the time frame of the bureaucracy and all the hoops that had to be gone through. Whatever salvage value was basically lost, and for the most part, just that it just stayed there, like in that deteriorating state. So when you drive by, it was this very clear, stark picture of between the two. So what SPI does, I know, with most of their properties, is that when they go in and do any significant harvesting, is they also have a significant replanting, because they're into that. That's their business, is growing and harvesting trees. They're not abandoning the landscape. And I think that probably is, if you want one good clear snapshot of just the difference of what the policy had been. Now the good news, I think, because of that experience and a few others, that was what really brought the concern when it came to the Chips fire and the one, what's the one up? Reading fire, in terms of having the kind of proactive, and I will have to say the Forest Service has worked hard, given the institutional inertia that they have to deal with, to get what they've gotten done. And I've seen, I mean, every time I've taken a trip here recently, there's logging trucks going and coming, and just last weekend I went and rode the Indian Valley Century, or at least a portion of it, and I was surprised. We were there in North Arm and Indian Valley, they were kind of between Greenville and Taylorsville. There's one whole section that was part of that Chips fire, and the damage is done. But there's been, you see evidence where they have been salvaging from that site there, and I'm sure those logs are the ones that are heading up maybe to Chester, if not over to Quincy.
Right.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Sure appreciate your
All right.
presentation as always. And thanks for being, you've been just a great member of the community.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate all the service you've given us. We're going to continue on. We're going to be able to finish our agenda this morning. We're going to get to H1, but first we're going to do information and consent, trying to work down our list, if you will. Chair to entertain a motion, unless a board member has anything they'd like pulled from the consent calendar. Anybody in the audience need anything pulled for?
I've moved to adopt the consent calendar, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Supervisor Chapman, seconded by Supervisor Pyle to adopt the consent calendar as presented. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Chair votes aye. Any opposition? Carries unanimously. To move on then, I believe, to H1. This is an issue between the West Patton Village Community Services District Fire Department and the rental space in 2067. Mr. Millar, you're going to be able to give us a staff report, and then I know that members of the department are here in the audience as well. So.
All right, good morning. Yes, the Town of Lassen has a rental agreement with the West Patton Village for one of our buildings, 2067 on the Furlong, which the fire department is occupying. This lease has been in effect for several years. The Public Works Department took over it last July of 2012, the oversight of that. In your packet here, you'll see a bunch of packet documentation. Back in April 24th of 2012, the board actually approved through the Local Use Authority, approved a resolution 12021, which basically enforced the previous rental agreement for several of the renters, which West Patton and CSD Fire Department is one of those. Prior to that, the fire department was paying utilities fees only. They were not paying the rental fee. On the April 24th resolution, basically that the board adopted where the rent would now be utility plus the rental fee. Again, prior to that, they were just to pay the utility fee. To date, and so to date, they still have just been paying the utility fees. The rent is based on the old rental. You'll see in the resolution at the time between the rental to 60 cents per square foot. Since this was an old rental, part of this resolution kept it at the 50-cent square foot cost. So you'll see that remained the same. Basically, there's 987 square foot of space they're renting at 50 cent. That comes up with the rental portion, which is $493.50. The utility portion is $46.06, and that was also based on the square footage and some actual costs that they determined back in, I think, 2009 or several years ago. So that's kind of where we're at now. Again, Public Works took over in July of 12. Since that time, we've sent out a couple letters, and then I think the last one we did was back in May, which we sent out with basically an invoice.
I had asked Larry, on behalf of West Baton Village, they requested that the board have a discussion on this. There are a couple of issues that they felt were outstanding, and I know that Mr. White is here and he can assist me representing West Baton, whichever one of you would like to speak. Ms. Peterson, who's the general manager of West Baton Village, it is her contention, one of her contention that she had not been notified of the board's decision, but obviously in your documentation here, you showed us that there have been letters that have gone back and forth. But most specifically, Ms. Peterson, and I believe rightly so, you know, she has always indicated that she will pay anything that is owed as long as she's invoiced. And I don't want to put words in her mouth, and I'll let the Herlong folks assist me, or West Baton Village folks assist me in this. So that's why it's here. Is that correct? We did not invoice them until we sent them this most recent letter with an invoice attached for the full year back. Is that correct?
That's correct. We sent the initial letter saying that it was approved and this would be the rental, but you're correct, we did not.
She's happy to pay on invoice, and of course, going forward into next year, you know, I don't know that that's even part of the discussion. I think we'll be invoicing on a monthly basis, and they'll grind that into their budget. The issue is they did not necessarily grind all this into their budget. So if before we get any questions from the board, I'd like to ask the West Patton Village folks, if you'd like to address the board on the issue. Firstly, they provide a great service down there, not only to the local community, but to the LRA properties and the buildings that we have down there. So not only are they housed in one of those buildings, but the Fire Protection Service, and I know Mr. Janae and Mr. Ewing are both here in the audience, and I don't know why. It may be to support Grover or whatever, but be that as it may, I think that Grover and his team have done a great job of bringing the Herlong area, if you will, along with everybody else into the fire protection work in Lassen County. So I want to thank you for that service. And so I think we're getting something in return for the fact that they're there. The other observation I'd make very quickly before we get on to the deliberation, and this is only for correction to staff, by the way, that's the action. Nobody else is demanding that property. It's unused property for the time being, other than the fire department. So anyway, Grover, thank you very much. And you got a good lesson in democracy, I hope, this morning, and enjoyed your stay here. So
Yes, sir.
you didn't get called out, did you?
No,
Didn't get called out.
No, sir.
That's good. If you don't mind giving your name and.
Robert White, I work for the Hurlong Volunteer Fire Department out in Hurlong. I'm the fire chief. The things, as I just seen his package today, so I'm not really sure. But I think what Vivian was wanting to know was about, like you said, about the invoicing of the facility out there, which is something that she wanted me to talk to about, seeing about maybe getting a deference or something like that for 2012, 2013.
2012. The
Okay.
12, 13 years.
Yes,
That's
and
correct.
that the facility has, you know, it doesn't have a bathroom. It's not handicap accessible, and it also has like air and heat, but it all depends on who's in the other side of the building. If they're there, you might have air, you might have heat, and if they're not there, in which we do our training at night and on the weekends, we do a lot of training and stuff of that nature, it's either hot or cold. And that's been my deal. I'm gonna pay, I don't mind, but I would like to be able to work in conditions where it's favorable, you don't have to sit there and bundle up, or you don't have to sit there and sweat to death or anything of that nature. That's all that I have on that, and that's why I'm here. Because I was just kind of like sheep sent to the slaughter. I really didn't know about this package until I just got it received it this morning.
Thank you very much for coming. Obviously, we'll have a continued discussion and we'll be available, obviously, to answer questions. Jim,
I just have one question.
comment?
Who are the current occupants of building 2067?
Pete's here. We've got Connie Jenkins and her real estate firm. We have the post office, obviously. There's the thrift shop, and the library is called 2067. Whoever can help me out. There's
Sheriff's
also
office.
Sheriff's office, that's correct. We've got the sheriff's office.
Well, there's, you want paid and unpaid, and non-paying renters. There's two different, the libraries, by that resolution,
Well,
is no
yes.
charge.
Right.
Thrift shop, I believe, is a no charge on that as well. We have two new renters. One has moved into the, where it used to be the credit union, has moved in and occupied that. That's all Cran Contracting. They are a contractor on the depot.
Yes.
And then there's another one, it's not all Crown, it's another, I can't remember the name of it, or Cherokee Nation, my name of that contractor too, that's in there occupying some space adjacent around the corner from the credit union that had been occupied in the past. And they're basically at that upper rental rate that, for that resolution that we were citing in there, it's a 66 square foot there on those. That covers, yeah, all the
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I could just comment, I appreciate Mr. White's presence, and I appreciate his not being tuned into, and he's doing his job, and he's volunteering. And I commend you for your service, and appreciate all that you offer to the community and through the community for the county at large. But when it comes to the correspondence there, and I guess maybe Ms. Peterson in particular, to take the position that they weren't aware of what these expenses were, and now they've got this bill that they're dealing with, and it's like after the fact. You know, given the notoriety, and given the media coverage, I mean, we took tours down there as a board, we went down and toured all through the facility, including going through the part that the fire department uses, you know, learning about what the conditions were in terms of lack of conditions, and all that was kind of discussed. You know, the county basically found itself inheriting these buildings from the Army. There's been a lot of debate, not a lot of unanimity on the board